You're festive this morning. That's good. I like it. You're awake. Well, we continue in our study of the Old Testament book of Daniel. Daniel, My Way or God's Way. This is part 8. And our scripture today is Daniel chapter 8. Now, so you deep theologians out there understand that want to go deep in the Word, you might have to get that somewhere else. Because by purpose and by design, I work real hard at keeping it simple. And I spend a lot of my time working on my sermon, taking big words out and theological words out. We baptized a young teenager a few weeks ago. And I don't know if you heard her say, but it really made me feel nice. She said at Argyle, she understands the preaching. Wow. How about that? That's what we're going for. And so I try to keep my sermons about 25 minutes in length. Why? Because you can't handle an hour. The truth is, I can't handle an hour of me. But you know, Jesus said the greatest of all commands is this, that we love God with all our heart. And the second command is just as important, that we love others like we love ourselves. And I figure if I ever master those two commands, then I'll be ready to go deep. But until then, I'm staying in the shallow end. Did you know the book of Daniel is not arranged in chronological order? Maybe they just did that to mess with us. I don't know. But this can get confusing. I considered doing our study in chronological order, but decided just to go straight through the book. So if you're keeping score, let me give you the actual order of the book of Daniel. Chapters 1 through 4, just like they're supposed to be. This talks about the Babylonian captivity, the dreams and the visions of Nebuchadnezzar, and the famous fiery furnace. But then we go to chapter 7 is next, and that's the vision of the four beasts. And then today's study, chapter 8, is next, the vision of the ram and the goat. Then back to chapter 5, for the handwriting on the wall and Babylonian is conquered. And then chapter 9, the vision of the 70 weeks. And then to chapter 6. Anybody confused? Daniel in the lion's den. And then finally, chapters 10, 11, and 12 are in order. And from chapter 2, verse 4 to chapter 7, verse 28, the book is written in Aramaic because it's directed towards the non-Jewish people, the Gentiles. And the rest of Daniel is written in Hebrew because it's directed specifically to the Jewish people. Daniel chapter 8 follows Daniel chapter 7 chronologically. And once again, Daniel sees a terrifying vision. You know, the monsters mostly come out at night. Mostly. And they've come out again in our study today. Chapter 8 happens in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. This vision happened before Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall. But soon the great Babylon will be defeated by King Cyrus, and they will be ruled by the Medes and the Persians. The lion with the eagle's wing, remember him? Would be defeated by the bear with the ribs in his mouth. Our story in chapter 8 features 5 main characters. Number 1 is Daniel the prophet. Number 2 is King Cyrus of Persia. Number 3 is Alexander the Great of Greece. Number 4 is Antiochus Epiphanes, ruler of Syria. And by the way, known as one of the most vicious, ruthless leaders in all of history. And then number 5, the Antichrist, the one who declares war against God. Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8 are very similar but different. If you remember, chapter 7 gave us the vision of the four-headed beast, which represented the 4 powerful kingdoms. And then chapter 8 puts our attention on Medo-Persia and Greece. And this will describe a very difficult time for God's people to survive. So let's read about the vision, and then we will try to interpret Daniel's vision. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 1. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me earlier. I saw the vision, and as I watched, I was in the fortress city of Susa, in the province of Elam. Susa was about 200 miles from Babylon, and it would eventually become the capital of the Persian Empire, so it was an important city. But most likely, Daniel did not physically go to Susa, but was transported there in his vision. In other words, Scotty beamed him up. And since Daniel was about to tell the story of the Babylonians being defeated by the Medes and the Persians, God went ahead and transported him there. In other words, God beamed him up. Beamed him up to the future capital city of the new empire, the city of Susa. Verse 2, I saw in the vision that I was beside the Ulai Canal. The Ulai Canal was a river that ran right through the middle of Susa. Verse 3, I looked up, and there was a ram standing beside the canal. He had 2 horns. The 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up last. I saw the ram charging to the west, to the north, and to the south. No animal could stand against him, and there was no rescue from his power. He did whatever he wanted and became great. As I was observing, a male goat appeared, coming from the west across the surface of the entire earth without touching the ground, a flying goat. The goat had conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came forward, the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal, and rushed at him with savage fury. I saw him approaching the ram, and infuriated with him, he struck the ram, breaking his 2 horns. And the ram was not strong enough to stand against him. The goat threw him to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat acted even more arrogantly, but when he became powerful, the large horn was broken. 4 conspicuous horns came up in its place, pointing toward the 4 winds of heaven. And from one of them a little horn emerged and grew extensively toward the south and the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew as high as the heavenly army, made some of the army and some of the stars fall to the earth, and trampled them. It acted arrogantly, even against the prince of the heavenly army. It revoked his regular sacrifice and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. In the rebellion, the army was given up, together with the regular sacrifice. The horn threw truth to the ground, and it was successful in what it did. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the speaker, how long will the events of this vision last? The regular sacrifice, the rebellion that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and of the army to be trampled? He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored. Now this vision centers around a ram, a flying goat, and a little horn. And some of the meaning of the vision is explained to us right here in the story. We don't need to look for things to make up. But other parts are more difficult to understand. Now, as we dig through this, we should always express our views in humility. We should resist the temptation to insist that our view is always the correct view. God will show us what we need to know. God will do that when we trust in Him. Remember that earlier in the book of Daniel, people would have visions and dreams, and it was Daniel who interpreted the meaning of those visions and dreams of others. But Daniel was so moved. He was so terrified. He was so emotional by what he saw and by what he experienced that he needed help interpreting his vision. Verse 15. While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there stood before me someone who appeared to be a man. I heard a human voice calling from the middle of the Ulai, Gabriel, explain the vision to this man. So he approached where I was standing, and when he came near, I was terrified and fell face down. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision refers to the time of the end. And notice that Gabriel called Daniel son of man, which is usually a title for the Messiah. But here it is used to emphasize that Daniel is only human. And so he needed help. Verse 18. While he was speaking to me, I fell into a deep sleep. You know, like some of you right now. With my face to the ground. And then he touched me and made me stand up and said, I am here to tell you what will happen at the conclusion of the time of wrath, because it refers to the appointed time of the end. In other words, this vision applies to the last days. This vision applies to the end times of Jewish history. The angel Gabriel explains the vision to Daniel. Verse 20. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the king of Media and Persia. Now this is our second character in the story. Our first character is Daniel the prophet. Now we're introduced to Cyrus, the king of Persia. Isaiah prophesied about Cyrus and even called him God's shepherd. God chose to use Cyrus even though he was not a believer in God. He used him to defeat the Babylonians, which would set the Jewish people free so they could return to their homeland. Babylon was identified with the lion and the eagle. Persia was identified with the ram. The two horns of the ram are symbols of Persia and Medes. And since Persia was the stronger of the two, it is the larger horn. Cyrus, king of Persia, was used by God. God used Cyrus to free the Jewish people. Cyrus allowed them to return to their country and rebuild the temple and also begin to rebuild their nation. And because God is sovereign, because God is in control, he can even use a non-believing pagan king to accomplish his purpose. That's how great our God is. Cyrus was called by God to set free the Jewish people and free them from Babylonian captivity. You know, God can use even the most unlikely people to do his will. It's amazing that God can even use someone like you. And it's even more amazing that God can use someone like me. See, I was voted a senior superlative in my high school, and it was the most likely to go to prison. You know, God can use anyone because God is sovereign. The angel Gabriel continues his interpretation of Daniel's vision as he introduces our third character, if you're keeping score. Verse 21, the shaggy goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes represents the first king. Our third character is Alexander the Great, the king of Greece. The goat, the flying goat, represents the nation of Greece and its king. Now this goat is angry. He is upset. And he runs so fast his feet don't even touch the ground. The goat had a large horn which represents Alexander the Great, the king of Greece. Alexander had led victory after victory. He even grew his empire larger than Cyrus grew his. He spread Greek culture all over the region. So much so that Greek became the language of the New Testament. I like to have some fun with you about what the Greek means in the Greek language. That's because of Alexander. Alexander brought nations together. He was a great unifying source. But the large horn of the goat was broken. And that broken horn represented the fact that Alexander would die at a young age of 33. His kingdom was then divided into 4 ways between 4 leaders. The 4 horns of the goat represent the 4 leaders. Verse 22, the 4 horns that took the place of the broken horn represent 4 kingdoms. They will rise from that nation, but without its power. And so that allowed the Roman Empire to take over. What the Greeks started, the Romans finished. The Roman laws helped people to live together in peace. The Roman roads and the Roman bridges completely changed travel and commerce. And with their much improved transportation system, even though the Romans did not realize what they were doing, they had provided a way for the gospel of Jesus Christ to spread all over the Roman Empire by the Apostle Paul. Our 4th character is introduced. He is the dreadful Antiochus, the king of Syria. Verse 8, 4 conspicuous horns came up in its place, pointing toward the 4 winds of heaven. And from one of them a little horn emerged and grew extensively toward the south and the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew as high as the heavenly army, made some of the army and some of the stars fall to the earth, and trampled them. It acted arrogantly, even against the prince of the heavenly army. It revoked his regular sacrifice and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. In the rebellion, the army was given up together with the regular sacrifice. The horn threw truth to the ground and was successful in what it did. Antiochus is so vile, so evil, so wicked, so terrible that it's hard to even explain and understand. In many ways, he parallels the later to come Antichrist. Antiochus gave himself the name of Epiphanes, which means he considered himself a god. In other words, he said he was the revelation of God. And he gave an order that only one religion could be worshiped. And that religion was the worship of Antiochus. The Jewish religion was forbidden. Anyone found worshiping Jehovah God or with a copy of the scriptures was immediately put to death. Antiochus claimed he was God. He stopped the worship of Jehovah God in the temple and replaced it with the worship of himself. This was called the abomination that makes desolate. In other words, the transgression of desolation. And through this, Antiochus lost his mind and went insane and later died in disgrace. Knowing some of the facts about Antiochus helps us to understand the prophecy that Daniel has given us. Because Antiochus did what the Antichrist will do even more in the last days. In Daniel's vision, it was asked, how long will the events of this vision last? And the answer was 2,300 days, which is about 6 1/3 years. Scholars believe that this was fulfilled before the birth of Jesus. It was fulfilled by all of the evil Antiochus did when he persecuted the Jews and he desecrated the temple. Antiochus died. And then the Jews were able to clean out and rededicate the temple to the glory of God. Today, this is part of the celebration of Hanukkah. This introduces our 5th character, beginning in verse 23, the Antichrist. Near the end of their kingdoms, when the rebels have reached the full measure of their sin, a ruthless king, skilled in intrigue, will come to the throne. His power will be great, but it will not be his own. He will cause outrageous destruction and succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the powerful along with the holy people. And he will cause deceit to prosper through his cunning and by his influence. And in his own mind, he will exalt himself. He will destroy many in a time of peace. He will even stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be broken, but not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. Now you are to seal up the vision because it refers to many days in the future. The Prince of Princes here is Jesus Christ, who is also called the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods. And the Antichrist will wage war against the Prince of Princes, and he will try to replace Jesus Christ. But the Prince of Princes will defeat him, the Antichrist, his false prophet, and Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire. You see, God is sovereign. God is in control. Our God reigns. And one of the beautiful things we see in this troubling story is how God can use anyone for his glory. Yes, even you and even me. Isaiah 45, verse 44 prophesied this. I call you by your name. Did you know God knows your name? For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen one, I give a name to you, though you do not yet know me. Since our God is sovereign, even when we're going through seemingly impossible stuff in our life, and some of us are there today, we can find comfort in the fact that our God is in control. We know. In the Greek, that means we know. That all things, in the Greek, that means all things work together for good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. So you can claim God's promise. It's right there for you to take. You do not need to fear the future. And you can choose my way or God's way. Will you put your faith and trust in Jehovah God today, our sovereign God? God bless you.
I've heard it. You've heard it. It's time for a new beginning. Time to start a fresh page or paint a new picture with our life. Sounds great in theory, but it can seem impossible. Life is messy. The lines have gotten blurred. Maybe we just don't know where to start. We look at the canvas of our lives and see mistake after mistake after mistake. It's overwhelming. When I look at my life with these messy lines and scribbles, it makes me think, is this as good as it gets? There's no eraser that can make this life make sense. But what if? What if there was someone that could make sense of our mess? They could take all our scribbles, all our mistakes, all our missed opportunities, and make them into a masterpiece. And then I remember there is. Jesus. He gives us a new life. Every day is new. Every day is a blank canvas full of possibility and promise. He takes our canvases, our lives that have been filled up with shortcomings, secrets, tragedies, and embarrassments, and he helps them make sense. When I look at the canvas of my life and I see nothing but disorder and chaos, I have to remember this. God is not a God of disorder. He's a God of peace. And you know what? He wants to take my hand and bring peace to the canvas of my life. So as we seek to make our mark, let us give God all our scribbles, all our mistakes, all our hurts, and trust that he will turn our messy lives into a masterpiece, his masterpiece.